Hello and welcome to Sharon Local History. This is part 2 about ice industry in Sharon. I will read you an article about how basically the harvest rate here in Sharon looked like. It should give you a pretty good idea about how incredibly hard work it was. I just want to let you know that I'm using lots of stock images that are from New England, are from ice industry, but not all of them are from Sharon. If they are from Sharon, there will be a little label saying so. I would like to recommend you to watch the first part of Sharon Ice Industry, where in the second half I explained the ice houses in Sharon and where they were located, as well as the history of the basics. And now I would like to tell you about basically how the harvesting look like. We have an incredible chapter in the Sharon A History book by Clifford L. Gerald, and I will just read it to you. That will give you a very good idea what the work actually involved. December 21st is the first day of winter. Shortly after that, a contingent of the harvesting crew arrived, consisting of 24 horses and a pack, which is a wagon mounted on runners, loaded with equipment for the horses. The animals were hitched in pairs in line. Bill Huntley rode one of the lead horses and guided the line from Boston. They were stabled on the corner of Mohawk Street and East Foxborough Street. As the ice thickened on the lake, the next contingent arrived, consisting of about 20 men, with Homer Lightbody in charge. These men were known as the bosses. They had rooms in the boarding house across the street from the stables, which was operated by Ma Prue, whose husband Pa Prue was the permanent manager of the plant. The men were charged $3.50 per week. Their rooms were on the second floor. At this time, all unemployed males in Sharon checked in with Homer and were given a number, and most of them were put to work at once making repairs, etc. Most of these men were in the building trades and were well known from year to year and had key jobs in the operation. Among them were steam engineers and a blacksmith. Norm Whitney operated the gasoline engines and motorized equipment. Norm was a local boy who, at the age of 12, was a genius with gasoline engines and at a time when mechanics were not as common as now. The thicker the ice became, the more it insulated the water from the cold. The ice did not freeze as quickly, so sometimes other means had to be used to bring the water to the top of the ice. Every time there was a snowstorm, all the men would line across the ice and snow about 6 feet apart with punch bars and do what was called sinking the pond. The men would punch a hole through the ice and then move forward 6 feet and punch another row of holes until a large area was covered. The weight of the snow and the man would cause the water to bubble up and saturate the snow and create more weight until it was possible to create from 4 to 6 inches of ice on top of the existing ice, which would freeze solid in a few days, the ideal thickness being 12 inches before harvesting. Should there be additional snow, large horse-drawn scoops would be brought into play, and the field would be cleared of snow. With the building repaired and the discharge doors closed in, the intake doors were opened to receive the new ice. The engineers had filled the steam boilers with water, steam raised, and a long endless chain that dragged the ice up from the lake had been loosened from the ice and the lower end that was just below the level of the lake. The chain was started bearing and the chain links were greased, and any crossbars that were cracked or broken were replaced. The blacksmith had repaired and sharpened the tools. Norm Whitney had all of the motorized pieces ready. The channel of the field had been surveyed and marked. All that was needed was 12-inch ice. The third contingent now arrived, which consisted of a crew of men picked from Skid Row by an unemployment office and shipped out to make up the full crew needed when the harvest started. A more bedraggled group of men has not been seen in Sharon. They were relegated to the third floor of the boarding house, which consisted of rows of cot beds and was known as the ram pasture. The smoking room became off limits for the youngsters, and the Joe Rose, the night watchman, began his patrols of the house to guard against fire, theft, or drinking. Usually, harvesting started the next day. The grooving crew started cutting the channel and the field at about 2 a.m. with their motorized saws, which cut grooves in the ice measuring 44 by 44 inches. The grooves left about 3 inches of ice to hold the cakes together. Large ice floats were then cut with hand saws and floated down the channel to the sluiceway. The individual cakes were split off and fed into the chain that carried them up to the runs and into the houses. The plant consisted of the main building, 300 feet long, 150 deep, and 50 high, with 4 runs along the front of the building and a sawdust room at the top, and separated into 8 rooms. All walls were double, with a 12-inch space in between that was packed with sawdust for insulation. Each room had an opening at each end. There was an enclosed incline what extended into the lake, which was about 200 feet long and carried the chain that dragged the ice up from the lake. Halfway up the incline, the ice cakes passed through the planer that kept the ice to consistent 10-inch thickness. As the ice arrived at the run being used, it would drop out of the chain and slide around a corner to be picked up by another single chain that carried it along the run. This chain was operated by a large single-cylinder gasoline engine through a belt that had to be extended from time to time as the upper runs were brought into play. This was Norman Whitney's responsibility. He stayed in the engine room 24 hours a day and slept on his workbench to start the engine every few hours to keep it from freezing and to be available should the motor equipment used by the groovers at night give trouble. As the ice in the houses reached even with the first run, a section was placed in the incline that allowed the ice to be carried up to the next run. A through under the planer collected the chips in a flow of water, and they were carried out into the ice and became what was known as the chip pile. This extended several hundred feet out into the lake. Only 4 houses were worked at a time, and each opening had a man known as a switcher. He would hook a corner of the cake and switch it onto the run into the house. The first switcher took every 4th cake, the second man every 3rd cake, the third man every other cake, and the last man the only cake left. If a cake had cracked on the way up, it was allowed to go off the end of the run into the waste pile. The pile lasted until July before it melted. It took about 4 to 5 weeks to fill the houses, then everything shut down. The engines and boilers were drained of water, the door of the houses were closed up and packed with sawdust. The tools were stored in the blacksmith shop and payday had arrived. Homer Lightbody and some men from Boston office had brought the cash, and the pay envelopes were filled and numbered. They would sit behind a long table in the dining hall, and the workers would form a line, giving their name and number, and would receive an envelope containing their earnings. Even the Skid Row group would leave the picture of health. Good food and no liquor for months had made quite a difference. Bill Huntley would line up his horses and leave for Boston at daybreak, and things would return to normal at the lake. So that was how basically operation at the lake looked like. I hope it gave you pretty good idea how incredibly hard work it was. Plus, imagine it was really very cold. And I would like to thank you for listening, and maybe subscribe to our channel so you can watch more videos. Thank you for watching a Sharon Local History.